What happens when the line between entertainment and real danger becomes so thin that no one notices the moment it disappears? In 2008, Japanese television host Tetsushi Yanaga learned that lesson in the most devastating way during a live broadcast that began as harmless fun and ended in tragedy. The segment was filmed outdoors in a rice field, using a small wooden platform surrounded by shallow, muddy water as the setting for a playful challenge. Two contestants stood back to back on the platform, trying to outlast each other in what looked like nothing more than one of those silly, physical competitions television audiences are used to seeing. It was bright, it was lighthearted, and there was nothing about the setup that seemed especially dangerous. Then the crowd began urging Tetsushi to take part. Although he seemed hesitant at first, he eventually agreed and climbed onto the platform. From the moment the round began, however, it was clear he was struggling. He lost his balance almost immediately, and in an instinctive effort to save himself, he dived forward into what he likely assumed was soft, harmless water. What he didn't realize was how shallow it actually was. His head struck the hard mud beneath with tremendous force, crushing his neck and leaving him instantly paralyzed. He collapsed face first into only a few inches of water, unable to move or cry out. What makes the footage especially difficult to watch in hindsight is that no one around him seemed to realize what had happened. The crew and other participants believed he was still playing along with the joke, and some even piled onto him, throwing mud and laughing, unaware that he had suffered a catastrophic injury and was physically incapable of signaling for help. By the time they understood that something was truly wrong, the damage had already been done. Tetsushi was pulled from the mud and rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed that he had suffered severe neck injuries and was paralyzed from the neck down. For many viewers, the shock came not only from the accident itself, but from the realization that it had happened in plain sight while everyone involved believed it was still part of the show. Despite the enormity of his injuries, Tetsushi later returned to television and became a symbol of resilience. But the footage of that day still raises painful questions about how entertainment can sometimes push people into risk without anyone fully recognizing the consequences until it is too late. His story remains a haunting reminder that behind every televised joke or stunt, there is a real person whose life can be changed forever in a single second. In Tetsushi's case, the warning signs were missed in real time. But sometimes, there are no visible signs at all, just a public image that hides a completely different reality underneath.
Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as The Greatest Story Ever Hooled and They Came to Burgle Carnegie Hall.
Phil Hartman was one of the most respected and versatile performers in television comedy, widely known for his work on Saturday Night Live, News Radio, and as a voice actor on The Simpsons. His talent for impressions, timing, and character work earned him the nickname The Glue among his SNL castmates, someone who could hold sketches together and elevate everyone around him. To audiences, Hartman came across as calm, professional, and effortlessly funny. But behind that public image, his personal life was far more complicated. Throughout the 1990s, Hartman was in a troubled marriage with his third wife, Bryn Omdahl. Their relationship had long been described as unstable, marked by frequent arguments and growing tension over the years. Omdahl struggled with substance abuse, including alcohol and drugs, and those close to the couple said her behavior could be unpredictable and, at times, volatile. Friends and colleagues of Hartman had reportedly urged him to leave the relationship, concerned for his well-being, but he chose to stay, hoping things would improve and wanting to keep the family together. By 1998, the situation had reached a breaking point. On the night of May 27th, Bryn Omdahl had been out drinking and using cocaine. When she returned home in the early hours of May 28th, another argument between the couple escalated. At some point after that, while Hartman was asleep in their bedroom, Omdahl entered with a firearm. She shot him multiple times, ending his life while he slept. In the immediate aftermath, Omdahl left the house and drove to a friend's home, where she confessed to what she had done. At first, the friend didn't believe her, but after seeing the state she was in, it quickly became clear that something was seriously wrong. Police were contacted, and as the situation unfolded, Omdahl returned to the house. When officers arrived, she locked herself inside a bedroom. Shortly after, she took her own life. Inside the home, police discovered Phil Hartman's body, bringing a sudden and tragic end to the life of a performer who had been at the height of his career. The news sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Cast members from Saturday Night Live and News Radio described him not just as a brilliant comedian, but as one of the kindest and most reliable people they had ever worked with. His death wasn't just a loss of talent. It was the loss of someone deeply respected by everyone around him. In the aftermath, News Radio was put on hold, and eventually, his character was written out of the show entirely. His absence left a noticeable void that couldn't truly be replaced. What makes this case especially haunting is the contrast between Hartman's public persona and the reality of what was happening behind closed doors. On screen, he brought laughter to millions. Off-screen, he was navigating a relationship that had become increasingly unstable and dangerous. And in the end, it serves as a stark reminder that even the most composed and successful individuals can be living in situations far more fragile than they appear. Circumstances that can unravel in a single night, with irreversible consequences. And with that contrast between public image and hidden reality, we move into a case where everything did unfold in front of millions. A moment that didn't stay a mystery, but was resolved in the worst possible way anyone could have imagined. What happens when a show built on spectacle, energy, and daring stunts suddenly collides with reality in the most devastating way imaginable? In December 2010, that question was answered on one of Europe's most famous television programs, Wetten das, a show so popular that millions across Germany, Austria, and Switzerland tuned in regularly to watch ordinary people attempt extraordinary feats. The formula had always seemed simple and entertaining. Contestants performed bold or unusual stunts, celebrities joined in, and the audience voted on what impressed them most. Over the years, the show became a cultural institution, with appearances from stars like Cameron Diaz, Justin Bieber, and Tom Hanks, helping build its massive appeal. Samuel Koch, a 23-year-old stunt performer in training, arrived that night hoping to make his name known through a challenge no one had attempted before. His stunt involved spring-loaded kangaroo shoes, which were meant to give him the height and momentum needed to jump over a line of moving cars. Each vehicle would be driven by someone he trusted, including his own father, which only heightened both the emotional and visual impact of the performance. At first, everything seemed to go exactly as planned. Samuel cleared the first car successfully, and the crowd responded with cheers. The second jump required a reset, but the third went smoothly as well. Then came the fourth car, the one driven by his father, and the atmosphere in the studio noticeably changed. Everyone understood that this was the most difficult point in the stunt. Samuel gave the signal. The car accelerated. He launched himself into the air, but this time he didn't rise high enough. His head struck the windshield, and he crashed down face first in front of the live audience. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. The cameras cut away, the host stopped the show, and what had been designed as entertainment became a national trauma unfolding live on television. Samuel survived, but his injuries were devastating. 2 shattered vertebrae left him paralyzed from the neck down, and the emotional toll on his family, especially his father, was immense. The host later resigned, and the show itself never truly recovered from what had happened that night. And yet Samuel's story did not end there. In the years that followed, he continued to live publicly and even appeared in films. becoming a symbol of determination and resilience in the face of life-changing injury. Still, the incident remains one of the clearest examples of how quickly things can go wrong when entertainment depends on risk, and how a single failed moment can transform a massive public event into something people remember for entirely different reasons than anyone ever intended. What happened on that stage was devastating because no one saw it coming. But the next case is even harder to process, because again, nobody saw it coming. Except this time, the person itself knew really well what was going to happen.
TV30 presents what is believed to be a television first.
A television news reporter from Florida, Christine Chubbuck, worked for Sarasota's WXLT-TV, where she hosted a weekly public affairs program called Suncoast Digest. The show focused on local community issues, covering topics that ranged from public safety to human interest stories. And Chubbuck was known as a dedicated journalist who took her work seriously. But behind that professional image, her personal life was far more complicated. According to colleagues and people who knew her, Chubbuck struggled with depression, loneliness, and a deep sense of isolation that had built over time. She was committed to her job, but she often found it difficult to connect with others, and those struggles quietly followed her into her work. All of that would culminate in one of the most shocking moments in television history. On July 15, 1974, during a live broadcast of Suncoast Digest, Chubbuck was delivering what appeared to be a routine segment. There was no immediate indication to viewers that anything unusual was about to happen. But then, mid-broadcast, she paused and made a statement that no one in the studio, or watching at home, was prepared for. She calmly announced that in keeping with the station's policy of bringing viewers the latest in blood and guts, she would now provide a first. She then reached below the desk, produced a revolver, and shot herself live on air.
In living color, exclusive coverage of an attempted suicide.
The broadcast immediately cut away, and the station switched to other programming, but the damage had already been done. The incident shocked everyone involved, from her co-workers in the studio to viewers across the region who had witnessed it unfold in real time. Christine Chubbuck became the first person known to take her own life during a live television broadcast. In the years since, the footage itself has never been publicly released and is widely believed to have been destroyed or locked away, which has turned it into one of the most infamous pieces of lost media. But even without the recording, the event remains one of the most disturbing moments in television history, not just because of what happened, but because of how suddenly and publicly it unfolded, leaving behind questions about mental health, media, and the unseen struggles people can carry even while appearing composed on screen.
I'm okay. You're okay. Repeat it. Say it. Say it. Say it.
What happened in that studio was over in seconds, leaving people stunned and searching for answers. But the next tragedy wouldn't be confined to one room. It would unfold in a crowded stadium, with thousands caught in the middle of it. Picture a typical Saturday afternoon. The sun is shining, fans are packed tightly into the stands, and the atmosphere is filled with anticipation as thousands gather for what should be a moment of celebration. On May 11, 1985, at Bradford City's Valley Parade Stadium in England, supporters came together to watch their team secure a divisional championship. It was meant to be a proud and joyful occasion, the kind of day people would look back on for years. But beneath that excitement, there was a danger no one in the crowd could see. The stadium itself was old. Its wooden stands had deteriorated over time, and underneath them, years of accumulated debris had been left to build up. Trash, paper, and other flammable materials had collected unnoticed, creating a hidden risk directly beneath where thousands of people were sitting. As the match went on, a small and seemingly insignificant action set everything in motion. a spectator casually dropped a lit cigarette under the stand. It landed among that dry, compacted debris. At first, it caused only a small flame, barely noticeable. But within moments, that flame began to spread, feeding off the dry material and moving rapidly beneath the structure. In less than 2 minutes, the entire stand was consumed, sending thick black smoke rising into the sky.
The heat is now becoming tremendous. I'm sitting immediately opposite the main stand.
What had been a celebration turned into chaos almost instantly. The crowd, once relaxed and cheering, was now overwhelmed with panic. People rushed toward the exits, but the design of the stadium made escape difficult. Narrow pathways and limited access points created bottlenecks, trapping many as the heat intensified and the smoke thickened. For some, visibility disappeared completely. By the time emergency services arrived, the fire had already done irreversible damage. 56 people lost their lives, and more than 200 others were injured. Families were left devastated, and an entire community was forced to confront the reality of how quickly everything had gone wrong. The investigation that followed revealed something deeply troubling. Authorities had previously been warned about the dangerous buildup of debris beneath the stands, yet no effective action had been taken to address it. Responsibility was ultimately shared between the club and local officials. In response, major changes were introduced across the United Kingdom. Wooden stands were banned, smoking at sporting events was prohibited, and stricter safety regulations were enforced to prevent anything like this from happening again. But for those who were there, no reform could undo what they experienced, because the Bradford fire remains a lasting reminder of how quickly a moment of joy can turn into something irreversible. That tragedy was visible, immediate, and impossible to ignore. But in the next case, what was happening remained hidden for a long time, until it finally came to light.
Masterson learning his fate just moments ago here at LA Superior Court.
Looking back at that 70s show today is difficult for many viewers, not because of the show itself, but because of what later came to light about one of its most recognizable actors. Stephen Hyde, played by Danny Masterson, was one of the show's breakout characters, known for his laid-back attitude, dry humor, and rebellious personality. At the time, Masterson's performance helped define the tone of the series, and his character quickly became a fan favorite. But while the show was gaining popularity in the late 1990s and early 2000s, a very different reality was unfolding behind the scenes. Multiple women later came forward accusing Masterson of sexual assault, with allegations dating back to that same period when his career was rising. Several of the accusers were, like Masterson himself, members of the Church of Scientology, which would later become a significant factor in the case. The Los Angeles Police Department began formally investigating Masterson in 2017, years after the alleged incidents took place. According to reports, the delay in legal action was influenced in part by fears of retaliation and the complicated dynamics surrounding the church. The case moved slowly, but eventually led to criminal charges. In May 2023, Masterson was convicted on 2 counts of rape. Later that year, he was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. For many viewers, the case permanently changed how they saw That 70s Show. A character that once represented humor and rebellion became tied to something far darker, highlighting the unsettling reality that the public personas people see on television can exist alongside actions that remain hidden for years.
The church has said the testimony and descriptions of Scientology beliefs during the Masterson trial were, quote, uniformly false. Masterson did not testify at his own trial. His lawyers also called no witnesses. The defense had argued all along that these acts were consensual.
That revelation forced viewers to rethink everything they thought they knew. And the next case does the same, but in a way that feels even more unsettling in hindsight. Game shows are meant to feel harmless. They are built around laughter, quick answers, and the kind of light entertainment that lets viewers forget everything else for a while. Family Feud has long been one of those shows, built on awkward jokes, playful tension, and just enough unpredictability to keep audiences entertained. But sometimes, the people standing under the bright lights are carrying a reality far darker than anyone watching could possibly know. In January 2020, Timothy Bleefnick appeared on Family Feud alongside members of his family. On screen, he came across as confident, funny, and relaxed, exactly the kind of contestant a show like that thrives on. He joked with Steve Harvey, gave the expected witty responses, and even ended the appearance on a high note by winning. Then came one answer that would later be remembered in a completely different way. When Steve Harvey asked him what the biggest mistake he had made at his wedding was, Timothy paused, smirked, and answered, "I do."
Honey, I love you, but said I do.
At the time, it landed as a dark little joke, the kind of answer that gets a laugh because it feels just edgy enough to stand out. The audience responded awkwardly, and even his wife, Rebecca, appeared visibly uncomfortable. But in the context of a game show, it passed as just another strange moment of TV banter. Only later did it become something much more unsettling. By 2023, Timothy and Rebecca's relationship had deteriorated badly. Although they had not officially divorced, they were living apart, and the tension between them had escalated to the point that Rebecca sought a restraining order because she feared for her safety. Then, on February 23, 2023, gunshots were heard at Rebecca's home. She was later found dead, shot 14 times, with signs that her bedroom door had been forced open. The home that once appeared ordinary and quiet had become the site of a brutal killing. Investigators quickly focused on Timothy, and on March 13th, he was arrested. He was later convicted of homicide and sentenced to life in prison in August 2023. What makes the case so haunting for many people is the way that old Family Feud clip took on a completely different meaning after the fact. What once seemed like a tasteless but forgettable joke now felt, in hindsight, like something deeply wrong had been sitting in plain sight all along. The case left people wondering how someone who appeared so comfortable, so charming, and so ordinary on television could go on to commit such a violent crime, and it reinforced an uncomfortable truth. The version of a person the public sees on screen is often only a fragment of who they really are. It showed how a moment on television can take on a completely different meaning over time. But sometimes, what's hidden behind the scenes isn't violence. It's something far more personal.
The most paranoid fantasy I could think of would not have prepared me for the 2 words the neurologist bludgeoned me with that day. Parkinson's disease.
Michael J. Fox is widely regarded as one of the most beloved actors of his generation, known for roles in Back to the Future and later for his work on the sitcom Spin City. But behind his continued success, he was quietly dealing with a diagnosis that would change the course of his life. In 1991, at just 29 years old, Fox was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a progressive neurological condition that affects movement and control. At the time, he was at the height of his career, and the diagnosis forced him into a difficult position: continue working while hiding his symptoms, or step away from the spotlight much earlier than expected. For several years, he chose to keep it private. It wasn't until 1998, while starring in Spin City, that Fox publicly revealed his diagnosis. By then, he had already spent years developing subtle ways to manage his condition on set without drawing attention to it. In his documentary Still, Fox later explained how he adapted his performances to conceal the early symptoms. He would lean against desks or doorways to steady himself, keep his hands occupied with props to mask tremors, or place them in his pockets when possible. To viewers at the time, these movements simply seemed like part of his acting style, small character details that didn't stand out. But in hindsight, those same details take on a very different meaning. What once appeared natural now reveals the effort it took for him to continue working while dealing with a condition that was gradually becoming more difficult to hide. It adds a layer of weight to those performances, not because they were flawed, but because they required far more strength and control than anyone watching could have realized at the time.
Fred, Joe, pleasure to see you guys, as always. You know, I was just thinking. And still, no one outside of my family knew.
While Fox was quietly managing something behind the scenes, the next moment would unfold publicly, interrupting everything in real time. Imagine sitting down to watch your favorite game show, expecting the usual bright lights, easy laughter, and harmless competition. That was exactly what K7 Panama offered its Chilean audience. An energetic, family-friendly program built around fun challenges and light entertainment. The sort of show people could enjoy without expecting anything more serious than a few surprises and a prize at the end. But in 2011, one ordinary broadcast turned into a moment of national grief. During a live episode, host Gianfilippe walked on stage, looking noticeably different from usual. His expression was serious, his tone subdued, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Contestants stopped what they were doing. The audience fell quiet, and viewers at home could sense that something was wrong before he even spoke. Then he delivered the news. A Chilean Air Force plane carrying military personnel, journalists, and beloved television host Felipe Camiroaga had crashed. The aircraft had been flying to Juan Fernandez Island to support recovery efforts after the devastating 8.8 magnitude earthquake that had already left deep scars across the country. It had reportedly attempted to land twice, but severe weather forced it to turn back, and then it disappeared from radar. Not long after, the worst was confirmed. There were no survivors. In that instant, K7 Panama ceased to be a game show. What had begun as routine entertainment became a live national mourning moment, with Gianfilippe visibly struggling to hold himself together as he shared the details. Across Chile, viewers who had tuned in for a few moments of distraction were suddenly confronted with a tragedy unfolding in real time. Rescue teams were sent out immediately, but as the search continued, the situation became even more heartbreaking. Wreckage from the aircraft was found, along with personal belongings from those on board, and eventually the bodies of passengers were recovered. One of the most haunting details to emerge later was that a camera recovered from the wreckage contained footage filmed shortly before the crash. Moments of ordinary conversation and smiling faces that became devastating in hindsight. For many Chileans, that broadcast remains unforgettable because it was one of those rare moments when the barrier between television and real life completely disappeared. The safety and routine of entertainment were shattered by the reality of sudden loss, and the show itself became part of the memory of that national tragedy. What lingers is not only the shock of the crash itself, but the way it interrupted something so normal, reminding everyone watching that life can change in a matter of moments, even while the world around you still looks exactly the same. That broadcast blurred the line between news and emotion. But the next one would blur something maybe even more dangerous: the line between fiction and reality. Could a television broadcast really trigger a national panic? In 1992, the BBC unintentionally demonstrated just how powerful that influence could be. On Halloween night, they aired a program called Ghost Watch, presenting it as a live investigation into paranormal activity inside an ordinary home in London. The broadcast was hosted by respected journalist Michael Parkinson, which immediately gave the entire program a sense of legitimacy. The story centered around a family who claimed their house was haunted by a malevolent presence they called Mr. Pipes. Reporter Sarah Green was inside the home, while Parkinson and a skeptic remained in the studio, analyzing events as they unfolded. At first, the show progressed slowly. There were no dramatic manifestations, no obvious signs of paranormal activity. The skeptic dismissed everything as psychological or staged, and at one point, one of the children was even caught faking an incident. For a while, it felt like a typical Halloween special, but gradually, the tone began to shift. small details became harder to explain. Movements in the background, shadows that didn't seem to match anything in the room, and subtle changes in behavior began to create a growing sense of unease. Then, suddenly, the situation escalated. A family member named Suzanne began speaking in a voice that clearly wasn't her own. It sounded unnatural, detached, and deeply unsettling. At the same time, strange figures appeared briefly in the background, easily missed but impossible to ignore once noticed. Back in the studio, even Parkinson and the skeptic began to lose their composure. By the final moments of the broadcast, the program had completely transformed. A séance was performed live, and what followed appeared to go horribly wrong. The entity known as Mr. Pipes seemed to take control of the situation. Lights flickered in the studio, wind began to move through the set unnaturally, and Parkinson himself appeared disoriented. He began softly reciting a children's rhyme, "Round and round the garden," as if he were no longer fully aware of what was happening. Then, without warning, the screen cut to black. What millions of viewers didn't realize was that none of it had been live. Ghostwatch was a scripted production. Although the BBC had included a disclaimer, many viewers either missed it or didn't understand its significance. To them, what they had witnessed felt completely real. The reaction was immediate. The BBC received over 30,000 phone calls from distressed viewers. Hospitals reported people experiencing anxiety and panic-related symptoms. Parents across the country described children having nightmares for weeks. What made it so disturbing wasn't just the content of the show, but how convincingly it blurred the line between fiction and reality. It raised serious questions about the responsibility of broadcasters and how far entertainment should be allowed to go. The BBC never aired the program again. But the impact it had remains one of the most powerful examples of how easily perception can be manipulated when people believe what they're seeing is real. Ghostwatch proved how easily people can believe what they see on television. But sometimes, what looks like harmless entertainment is connected to something far more real. Reality courtroom television thrives on conflict, exaggeration, and those moments where the audience laughs because the drama feels just absurd enough to be entertaining rather than real. Christina's Court, hosted by Judge Cristina Perez, fit perfectly into that formula, delivering heated arguments and strange personal disputes with a comedic tone that made even serious accusations feel lighter than they really were. One of the show's most memorable viral moments came during an episode in which comedian Sean Harris sued his ex-girlfriend over unpaid rent. The atmosphere in the courtroom was playful, the exchanges were full of jokes, and the audience treated the case like exactly what it was meant to be: television. At one point, Judge Christina turned to her bailiff, Renard Spivey, and asked how long he had been married. Renard answered calmly, 7 years. And Harris responded with a joke that made the room erupt in laughter. "Look at him, he looks mad." It was the kind of harmless television moment that feels disposable the second it ends, a quick laugh before the segment moves on. But nearly a decade later, that moment took on a far darker meaning. In 2019, Renard Spivey was involved in a real-life tragedy that shocked people who remembered him from the show. According to reports, he and his wife, Patricia, had been in the middle of a heated argument at home, reportedly involving accusations of steroid use and infidelity. The confrontation escalated until Renard reached for a firearm. 2 shots were fired. Patricia was killed. When police arrived, they found Patricia's body in a closet and Renard himself suffering from a gunshot wound to the leg, which he claimed had happened accidentally. The trial that followed was emotional, contradictory, and difficult to untangle, with conflicting stories and testimony creating a picture that was far messier than anything viewers had ever seen on a courtroom show. In the end, the court ruled the shooting unintentional, and Renard was found not guilty. For many people who had watched him on television, that verdict did not erase the shock of seeing someone they recognized from a light-staged courtroom environment become the central figure in such a tragic, real-life case. His story remains a reminder that the people we become familiar with on screen are not fictional characters, even when the setting around them feels designed for entertainment. Behind the uniforms, the roles, and the camera-ready smiles, there are private lives and hidden tensions that viewers never see until something goes terribly wrong. Now that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.